Welcome back to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Jesse.
I'm Jesse,
And I'm Josh.
and this is a show to help you save the best and burn the rest of your culture and faith practices.
Absolutely. And today we have a very special episode. We're going to be talking basically about big church versus small church.
Ooh.
And just having a chat around that. Could be a little bit controversial, but probably not. I don't know.
No, I don't think this will be super controversial unless we make it controversial, which this is going to be a more free-flowing conversation, so we'll see where the current takes us. I'm excited.
Yeah. And both of us, we've had some interesting experiences with this, and we're pastoring different sized churches, so we just think it's an interesting conversation to have. But it's really nice. This is kind of the first time in a little while that Jesse and I are just recording with just us.
Yeah. I think the last time that we did this was almost 2 months ago, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, like we've had so many great guests, which has been awesome, but sometimes it's nice to just sit down and say, hey, Jesse, how you going?
Yeah, and to include everybody else in this podcast conversation, of course. So think about this episode as we're just sitting down with you and we're just having a chat over a cup of Joe or Jill or Jane or whatever it is that you drink.
Who drinks Jane? What is drinking Jane?
I don't know. I'm just trying to make a joke around calling drinks by names. I don't know where that came from, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Now that you think about it. In fact, that even lends me to, it's a perfect segue to the question of the week.
Amazing. What have we got?
Because what I was thinking, and this is more, this question is coming from a selfish place, but I'm thinking, like, do you know of any, like, kind of strange origin stories of something? Like a product or a song or a word that you've just been dying to share, but it has just never come up in conversation?
A product, like from my childhood or like that I'm using right now?
Like, no, just like it doesn't really, the origin story is what you're sharing. It's like, you know, like, say there's like this, like, if you had the origin story for where the phrase "a cup of Joe" comes from, or the origin story of a movie, or the origin story, like, where did this movie come from? It's a fun little origin story.
A fun little origin story.
Yeah, I can go first because I'd already thought, like, I want to share this origin story because I just discovered it recently, and I thought it was just really fun. And I'd be kind of like, I want to share it with someone, but I don't know when it'll ever come up in conversation. So this is the moment.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Okay. So Super Smash Brothers is a game I really appreciate, right? I'm a little bit rusty. I haven't played it in a while. I'm just taking a break, playing my backlog of games, wanting to get a bunch of things finished. But I recently discovered the origin of Super Smash Brothers, like where the concept came from. And I thought it was just, really just really fun.
Mm-hmm.
So Masahiro Sakurai is like the main designer and like game coordinator. So he's always loved fighting games. And there's a very popular series of fighting games called King of Fighters. I've never played it because I'm not really into super competitive fighting games like Street Fighter and, you know, like Mortal Kombat, all those ones with the really complicated combos. But anyway, so apparently the story goes, back in the 90s or something, he was at an arcade, because arcades are really popular in Japan, and he was playing, I think there was a King of Fighters stand, and he was playing, and then there was this guy and his girlfriend came, and the guy was like, oh, hey, do you want to play? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so they played, and Masahiro just absolutely obliterated him, like, over and over and over again. And he felt bad because he, like, schooled the guy so hard in front of his girlfriend. And he's like, it just doesn't seem fair that, like, I have all this practice with fighting games and somebody who's new comes along and just can't even get a hit on, like, can't do anything in the game. So he designed Super Smash Brothers to be the first fighting game that anybody could play. Like, it's got some complicated parts to it, but it's not, like, it's easy entry, but really hard ceiling. Not as hard a ceiling to, you know, like, not as high skill base as, like, Street Fighter or King of Fighters or something like that. But still, it's pretty hard to be like amazing at Super Smash Brothers to get to like the top. So yeah, that's where the game came from, and I found it really cool.
Wow. That is
Yeah.
that's
And
really
then-
cool.
Apparently, when they first made it, it was like these random generic guys wearing dragon costumes were the fighters, and then they came along and were like, oh, actually, maybe this will sell better if we just chuck a whole bunch of random Nintendo characters in, and they did, and
Wow.
next minute, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
so
a smash hit.
Yeah,
Hey.
that was really good.
Yeah. Hey. Oh, that's so,
So yeah, good things can come out of schooling a guy in front of his girlfriend
cool. Oi.
at a fighting game.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, very cool. Oh, I never knew that, and now I know another piece of information that will definitely come in handy in my life somehow. I'm not sure how.
It'll probably come out in a sermon illustration
Ooh.
in like 5 years from now. Who
Bro,
knows?
it's so fun throwing in the weirdest sermon illustrations. Oh man, there's been some weird ones out there that I've used, and people have just
Oh, yeah.
gone, "What?" Oh man, it's so much fun. Okay. So my origin story. Are you familiar with a mathematician, inventor, and game designer named Richard Garfield?
I know Garfield the cat,
Okay. All right. No.
but I have a feeling they're unrelated.
Okay. Richard Garfield, in the early 90s, actually in the early 80s, he invented a board game called Robo Rally. Okay?
Cool.
And he tried to get this published, but he was unsuccessful at getting this game published. It was eventually published, but it wasn't incredibly successful. He then turned his attention because he was a big Dungeons and Dragons fan. He loved playing Dungeons and Dragons with his friends. But while they were playing Dungeons and Dragons, he would go to conventions and he would go to gatherings, and they would all play D&D together. And in between games, he wanted to create these some little games because he would get really bored in between D&D games. And he started thinking, what if I created just like a little game that I could play with my friends, like 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 and whatever, that I could just play with my friends in between D&D games. And because he had a pedigree in games design, he thought, okay, I'm going to create a little game that my friends and I can play in between rounds of D&D just to keep us entertained, okay? And he created this little game that he called Five Magics, okay? And it was a combination of like a card game, like poker or blackjack, but instead of using playing cards, this was one of the first of its kind, it used a system like collectible baseball cards, where you would collect cards and then you would formulate them into a deck. And then you would use that deck against your opponent, and it would be the first player to reduce the opponent's life total to 0 would be the winner.
I feel like I know where this is going.
I'm sure you do. So,
Yeah.
at all this time, Richard Garfield was trying to find a publisher for Robo Rally. But then a little-known company called Wizards of the Coast
I knew it.
started talking to Richard Garfield, and they said to him, hey, we're not so interested in this Robo Rally game that you've been trying to get published, but we are interested in this other game, Five Magics, that you are trying to get off the ground. Can you develop this some more and give us a product? Which he did, and eventually in 1994, there was released the alpha set, the very first set of a little card game that would become known as Magic the Gathering.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Funnily enough...
Now the biggest card game in the world, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Funnily enough, Robo Rally did eventually get published. In fact, it got published many, many more times after that. And I played it at Avondale College for the first time with a mutual friend of ours who got me into board games in general, Mr. Damien Hedges. So shout out to Damo if he's listening.
And his beard.
And his beautiful beard. So thank you, Damo, for introducing me to both Robo Rally and Magic the Gathering. It's a
Amazing.
beautiful thing. Beautiful thing.
I love. We're such geeks. Like, we had the opportunity to give the origin story for anything, and both of us choose games. Like, I'm not really.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be surprised.
Nah, bro. This is who we are. Let's just embrace it.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'd love to hear your weird origin stories too. So anything you have, yeah, make sure you send us through, because it's kind of fun when everybody answers a question of the week. So you can just shoot us through a DM or post it in the group, whatever.
Absolutely.
Anyway, let's get on to the secondary topic for today. No,
The filler. This is the filler that we have to put in the episode to justify its length.
That's how we fill out the last 50 minutes. So first 10 minutes is imperative. But okay, so big church versus small church. This is like something that I hear so much dialogue about. And to be honest, I hear a lot of like, I'm going to say ungrounded opinion about it too. Like, people just have these ideas and they just spurt them about both big churches and small churches. They're not really grounded. They might be grounded in like a caricature of them.
Or they might be just grounded in personal preference. I think that's probably what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, but some people, I think some people, when you talk to them, they take it beyond personal preference and try and make it like theological, and one's right and one's wrong. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it definitely comes out of preference, but they would be like, no, it comes out of the Bible. And like, don't get me wrong, there are definitely some principles in the Bible for what church should look like. But I think there is also a lot of wiggle room. Exactly how that can play out and the most optimal way to do it in our current day and age.
So growing up, would you say, Josh, that you had more of a big church experience or more of a small church experience? If you can think of your church experience growing up, what would you say had the most impact on you?
I was thinking about this before, and I think I had a bit of both. Because we moved around a bit. But we should say as well, like, a big church in Australian Adventist context, Australia, New Zealand, is like 200. And a small church would be like 50 or less.
Yeah.
Is probably what we're... Obviously, I know in the grand scheme of things, like, a big church should be measured at like over 500. But in the South Pacific Adventist context, when we talk about big church, obviously this can be applied to a whole lot of things, but our context is like over 200.
I would say that there's probably a clear delineating line between mainline and extra denominational churches, and then like mainline evangelical / probably charismatic, because like both evangelical and charismatic are very broad umbrellas, and they also overlap a lot. So I definitely think that when we're measuring small and large, as you say, it's very helpful to think about in terms of what is big and what is small in your context. So whatever your context is as you're listening, just contextualize what we're saying to whatever it is that you're most familiar with.
Yeah, that's good. So growing up, I started out in like Bairnsdale Church, which I would say is like a medium-sized church at the time. It's bigger now. Like, it's a country church, but it was sort of a country hub church. So, yeah. I would say I spent probably most time in a big church, but then when I went back to Melbourne after, that's when I would say we went to a smaller church, and then when we planted a church that was even smaller but very contemporary.
Yes.
So
yes,
I would say like the last church I called home before I became a pastor was small but contemporary.
Which
and
those two often don't go hand in hand, right?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably that church probably had a lot of impact on me because I spent a lot of time there, and okay.
Yeah.
So we'll go with that. But
Okay.
I have had a lot of experience growing up in big churches because we went to like college church.
Right.
And Fox Valley as well, which were big churches.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would say my context growing up was a lot of small country churches. I've lived in rural New South Wales, rural Victoria, in the Sale Valley. I've lived in rural Western Australia. I had never lived in a large city until I moved to New Zealand. And when I say large, I don't really even mean like over 500,000. I mean like over 100,000. right? So I've lived my entire life in like small rural towns or outside on properties, and never in a town more than 50 to 100,000 people. So even now, I live in a town that's got like 90-ish thousand people in it. So I've never lived in a Melbourne, I've never lived in an Auckland, I've never lived in a Sydney. And the churches that I've always attended growing up, it wasn't until, same as you, sort of Avondale College, that I ever attended a church over 200-300 members. Certainly not in terms of even weekly attendance. So a lot of rural churches. Bowral Church was my home church growing up in the Southern Highlands, but Narromine, Dubbo, even Western Australia and Sale, Victoria, those were the contexts that I was most familiar with growing up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go. So now you're pastoring a probably smaller church.
Yeah.
And I'm pastoring a larger church in my context.
Yeah. You went from pastoring a fairly large church to a larger church than that in your ministry here in New Zealand. Would that be fair to say?
I think they're about I think they're about the same.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to... Yeah, Palmy had a very fluctuating...
Yeah.
Like, if everybody showed up, it was quite a large church, but
Okay.
there are a lot of people who were helping out with other rural churches.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, Hamilton is more of a consistent group
Okay.
there. So it feels larger, but I don't know if they're necessarily... Yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter.
Whereas I went from pastoring in a fairly large church in Tauranga to pastoring a very small church, and then pastoring two very small churches, and then going back to pastoring one very small church, a church which you and I both shared out in the sticks in Masterton.
Good times, good crew out there.
Yeah. So I mean, you and I have both had I would say a fairly broad experience when it comes to pastoring. From maybe it would be fair to say, and you can tell me if you don't think this is correct, but probably small to medium. I don't know that you and I really have much experience in like the big churches, even within an Adventist context. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking like 400 plus to me is like a big church.
Right.
You know, and I know there are some people listening who go to like La Sierra Church, which
Right.
is like thousands. So,
Yeah.
but you know, in our context, that would obviously be like another level up. And
Yeah.
I would love to have experience working in that kind of thing just to understand it.
I would think. I
it's
think
super fascinating
if
to me.
I'm correct. Yeah, I think 4,000 or 5,000 is what's considered a mega church by United States standards. So that would probably, La Sierra, Loma Linda, those sorts of churches would definitely be considered as large churches, mega churches, even in an Adventist context. So it's possible. Like we might think small because we're here in the South Pacific, but there are definitely what you could consider mega churches in different parts of the world, aka the United States, and probably not very much else outside of that.
Yeah, totally. So I guess when we're going to be having the conversation around big church versus small church, it's not really which one's better, I don't think, because straight out of the bat, there's definitely pros and cons of both. But yeah, I don't know. You've been having some thoughts around this, so do you want to just run with what you've got and what you're changing? Because I think your contrast between the churches that you've pastored is bigger than mine. So I think you'll have an interesting start with this.
Okay. Well, I'll just share what I've been thinking about for the last like year or so, maybe 2 years, and then we'll see where that takes us. So when I started out in ministry in 2016, I started straight out of Avondale, and I got plonked into a medium-sized church of 150 to 200 regular attenders, and it was a fairly wealthy church. Had a lot going for it, still has a lot going for it, and of course every church has problems, but I consider it to be a pretty good church. So when I started out, my aim or my goal it really changed and it really shifted along with me growing up and maturing as a person. So when I started, I really started devouring leadership material, Craig Groeschel and Carey Nieuwhof, and a lot of the big names that everybody knows, and their books and podcasts and stuff like that. And I started to try and figure out what sort of pastor or what sort of leader I wanted to be, what sort of I needed to put in place as my overall aims and goals in ministry. And as I did that, I started to think that my main goals and my main purposes should be to grow this church as much as possible so that we could reach as many people for the gospel as possible. The only problem is that didn't really happen, at least in the 2 years while I was serving at that church. And I was the associate pastor, so, a lot of the time, a lot of my job was supporting my senior pastor, which is fine. But I started to get frustrated when 2 years after I started at the church and I was leaving, I would look back and think, what have I actually accomplished? Like, what have I actually done in this church? And I started to feel like a failure, because when I'd gotten to that church, it was at a certain point, and when I left, I would have hoped that it was better off, at least spiritually, or perhaps, hopefully, even numerically than when I'd gotten there. And I honestly couldn't say that for certain. And so I kind of left that church feeling like I'd kind of failed as a pastor, like I'd spent 2 years there and I hadn't really accomplished much. So then I transitioned from being an associate pastor in Tauranga to being a lead pastor here in Palmy, at a church that was much smaller, and we didn't even have our own building. We still don't have our own building. Much smaller budget, like a quarter of the size of the budget at this big church. And I thought, okay, I need to get in. I need to grow this church. I need to get us to the point where we can, get our own building, and we can, reach lots of people and have a, really great band and, ministries and all that sort of thing. And over the past 2 years, because it's just come up on 2 years that I've been here, a lot has changed, but not what I originally intended it to change, in terms of I didn't start at 30 people and now we're at 300, right? We're still more or less where we are. Tithes and offerings have increased, but only by a very small margin over the last few years. Attendance has increased, but only of a very small margin over the last few years. So the big dreams and the big ambitions and the sort of, we're going to get in here and we're going to save the world and we're going to impact in a huge way and we're going to build a mega church within New Zealand. They thought it could never be done. Sort of ambitions that I used to have, which I know sounds silly. I in some ways I don't have anymore. And I think the thing that has really rocked me, and then I'll shut up after this, but the thing that I think has really made the difference is that over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to attend a number of workshops and conferences and PDs for ministry inside our faith tradition and as well outside our faith tradition. So I've gotten a little bit of an insight into how different faith traditions, charismatic, evangelical systems, how they work, the language that they use, the strategies that they use. And of course, I've gotten all of that as well from the podcasts and the books that I've read, both from Adventists and not Adventists alike. And one of the things that I've started to think and started to internalize is the way that we spend money, the way that we strategize around building churches, whether they're big or not big, and the way that we actually steward what God has given us. And this comes into play in terms of the sort of churches that we build, because I have always thought beforehand that, okay, in order to be more of an impact in the kingdom, we need to get a bigger church, we need to get a bigger budget, we need to increase offerings and tithes so we can do bigger and better things, so we can get more people into the building, so that we can save more people, so that we can help more people to find life in Jesus. And that seems like a fairly pure idea until I started to notice a lot of the churches that I was going to for these conferences and these events are really beautiful, and their overheads are huge, and their budgets must just be enormous if what their budgets are married up to the incredible expenses that I see. You know, when you look at like a sound system and you can get an idea of how much it costs because you know what the equipment is, then you start to think, is this worth it? Is it worth it to have a big church where your budget is in the millions, and sure, you might be getting a few thousand people every Sunday or every Saturday or whatever the case may be, but is it worth it to have a big church like this? Is it wise on a stewardship level, and is it really more effective? So I've been on a little bit of a journey about this. As you can tell, I haven't made my mind up because I'm on a journey, but I guess that's why I wanted to have this conversation. So that's me just kind of blurting everything out that's been in my brain for the last few years. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like, just, I guess, with the first thing you were saying, I don't think it's bad to dream of building a big church. Do you know what I mean? Of like having lots of people as a part of a church. It does depend on the place where it comes from, because if it comes from a pride and I want to be the hero, I want to be the celebrity, then that could be bad.
Yeah.
But if it just comes from like a genuine heart to see people saved, I don't know. Like when you were saying it sounds silly, I don't think it does sound silly. Like having big audacious goals like that, because there is I guess
maybe it's not that it sounds silly, maybe it's that it sounds idealistic, and it may be idealistic, but idealism often isn't a bad thing. I mean, I think a lot more people in the church are more cynical than they are idealistic, so maybe that's what it is.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I think like healthy churches grow is the way I see it. Whether that doesn't necessarily mean that a healthy church has to be a big church, because you can have small healthy churches, you can have small unhealthy churches, you can have large healthy churches, and you can have large unhealthy churches. All four are very possible and very existent. So I think it's interesting because, I mean, you can grow a small church, but that doesn't necessarily mean your church has to be bigger, because you can structurally, like, you can have new people coming and discipling new people, but then you can sort of send them, or, you know, make new, like you can have like more small churches or multiple services that are all small, or I don't know. I think it's more of a structural thing, right? Like we both want healthy churches, but it's whether the structure is better, big or small, and whether more health, I guess, can come from small or big churches for the individual disciple, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is complicated to think about.
Yeah, well, that's why I haven't made my mind up about this, because it is a complicated discussion. And I guess maybe what it comes down to, or for some people, is, do you think that there is a temperament or a personality that fits better in a bigger church or a smaller church? Do you think that's a thing?
I think so. I think some people naturally fit better in bigger, medium, or small churches. Just, you know, like, for example, my wife, Danelle, really, she doesn't like crowds that much, whereas I love crowds.
Yeah.
You know, like, maybe it's extrovert, introvert. But yeah, so for me, I'm okay with being in big crowds at churches, whereas some people, that's just like horrific. They want a small setting, and some people want more discussion in a way. Like they want church to be more back and forth, which the bigger you get, the less that's logistically possible.
Yeah.
Because I've seen discussions try and take place in rooms of 500 and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think it works great. Anyway.
It doesn't work great. I mean, you have to be an excellent MC to make that happen, but not everybody has that skill. One of the things that I've often heard, and this is a very classic argument against growing churches, because one of the things that's really surprised me when I was in Tauranga was that I found that there was some people in that church who actually genuinely didn't want the church to grow. Like, they actually were very happy with where the church was at numerically, and they actually didn't want to see any new people. And you could probably pick that apart on a theological level, like how bad that is theologically. But one of the things that I often heard was, well, if there are more people in this church, I'm not going to be able to know everybody. I'm not going to be able to know everybody's name. I'm not going to be able to know who they are. You know, I'm not going to be able to have a personal discussion. What have you heard that discussion? Had that argument?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I mean, I've had people. I've had people complain to me that our church is too big. I had that at both of my churches. They're like, our church is too big. I don't know everyone. And I'm like, honestly, once it's over 25, you can't know everybody. You know, like, really, you might be able to know their names, but you don't know them.
Yeah.
My answer, and I don't know, this is like the classic answer I've started always giving is I said, it doesn't matter if I know everyone or if you know everybody. What matters is that everybody is known.
Oh, sorry. Is that Brené Brown there? Sorry.
I don't know where that comes from. I probably stole it from somewhere, but I have no idea where anymore. I've been using it for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could be Brené Brown. Could be... No, I don't think it's Craig Rochelle or Andy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's good though.
I have no idea. Maybe it was original. Who knows?
Do you want to expand on that? Like, that's obviously very snappy, but do you want to expand on, like, what does that mean?
Well, I think it more matters that everybody who comes to your church feels a part of the community and that people know them. You know, like whether it's just the area where they sit, that people, you know, those people know them, or if they're in a part of a small group or a Sabbath school group or a Sunday school group, whatever your church is like. I think it more matters that like everybody who comes is known, because then it doesn't mean that everybody like relies on the pastor to get to know everybody. And you know, because it's just honestly, once you get over 20, I don't think you really can know them well enough that it matters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, whereas if you have a church and say there's like 150 people at your church, and you have like 150 smaller opportunities, and all 150 people are at those, and all of those have between 6 to 12, well, and you know, say around 10 people, then all of a sudden it's pretty easy to know everybody in a group of 10 and know them well and be there when things happen. Like, that's more churchy to me. But so like that's an argument for both small and big churches in a way, because you can have a small church of like 10 people, like a house church, and that's awesome because you all know each other so well, and you know everybody. But obviously you have limited resources, which we'll get into later about resources. And then you get bigger, and it is genuinely hard to know everybody and build those relationships and to like love the unlovable and all that kind of stuff. Like, if somebody's annoying, it's pretty easy to avoid them at a bigger church, like the bigger you get. But I guess it's if you have like lots of small groups or like even healthy Sabbath school groups at your church, then everybody has an opportunity to be known, like in that house church.
Yeah. No, that's good. The other thing that I've often wondered about is which church or which type of church is better for somebody who's far from God, whether they're unchurched or they're de-churched or they're completely off the planet when it comes to religion and spirituality. Is there a type of church that is better? And I'm not talking about in terms of worship style, like that is not even a part of this conversation as far as I'm concerned. But is there a type of size church that is better for somebody who is wanting to try out faith or, you know, just has a general interest?
Yeah, that's a super interesting thing, eh? That's so, I don't know if there is even an answer, because I feel like it comes down to that personality and temperament again. Because some people, like, they are just open, like they could just walk into a house church, be invited and come into a house church, which for me is really intense to go and even visit somebody's house church. I'd be like, oh, you know, they'll all notice me and that kind of thing. But some people are just wired like that, and that would be really good because then everybody can know them and bring them along on the journey straight away. Yeah. Whereas some people need to be able to sit at the back and observe a little bit before they make up their mind. I don't know. That's how I see it. What do you reckon?
Well, It's interesting because all I really have is like anecdotal evidence of people that I've known. Like
Right.
when I was in Tauranga, there was this one guy who I really tried to connect with, and it was really hard. And the reason for that was he would come in to church at like 10 past 11 and he would leave every time at like 5 to 12. So he would just come in as the service was starting. So the music was, the music team was up on stage or somebody was doing announcements. And then he would always, without fail, leave just before like the final prayer or the final song. And I'd met him once or twice and I really wanted to connect with him. And there was one day where I wasn't preaching. And so I was able to just kind of surreptitiously make my way to the foyer so that I could like intercept him as he was leaving. And
Nice.
that's what I had to do like one or two times just to like connect with him and learn his name and find out what he was all about. And I just found out that he was shy. Like he wasn't super into crowds either. So he would come in and he would sit in the back and he would enjoy and then he would leave. And that was what he wanted to do. And so I tried to get him into a small group. I tried to say, hey, I'm having a dinner party, etc., etc. You want to join? And he never took because that's not what he wanted. He just wanted to come in. Eventually, he met one or two people who were kind of shy and awkward like he was. And that was cool because they could talk and understand each other. And that was great. But it seemed to me that there was, maybe it is a temperament thing. On the other hand, now that I'm pastoring at Mosaic here in Palmy, it was so funny. A few weeks ago, we had what we would think there with the rhythms of Mosaic in my church. It's a really interesting church. It's kind of like Palmy in that some weeks there'll be a whole bunch of people, and some weeks there'll be nobody. We were preparing for a Sabbath that we just thought this is going to be a dead service. There's going to be nobody here. We're just going to sing some songs and we're just going to have a little bit of a Bible study. It'll be real basic. Little did we realize we had 7 visitors, all completely different from somebody was visiting from Auckland, so she brought her mother along. Somebody, there were these 3 or 4 guys who all just rocked up, who were like older gentlemen who just, joined the service for no reason. And there was this one other older gentleman who he just rocked up on his own. So it was really interesting because I got to talk to not all of them, but at least 3 of them. They were the guys who were all in the group. I got to connect with one of the old fellas. And I just, asked him, where are you from? Oh, you're local. That's cool. So what brought you to church this morning? And he just told me that he's been trying out churches and he wants to find a church. Anyway, he said that he tried the church that Josh has been pastoring until he moved to Hamilton, Palmy Central. And he said, oh, yeah, no, I thought I'd try out Central and I'd try out Mosaic, but I think I'm going to go to Central because I just think their music is a bit more appropriate. Appropriate. So I thought, oh, okay, good on you, mate. Good on you for coming. I'm glad you came. That's cool. Anyway, I talked to the other old guy, Earl, who has been coming for the last few weeks now, and he said the exact opposite. He said, hey, I tried out Central, but I like the music here better, so I'm just going to come. And I'm like, so what brought you to church? And he's like, oh, he told me his story and, he's really keen to jump into a small group. So I've got him connected into a small group and he's just literally rocked up. He's connected with people. He's talked to them. He's become friends with a few people and now he's part of our church for however long he might be. Who knows? But he is now. And it's just like...
Yeah, wow.
You can't strategize for that. You can't like there's no data around making that happen. It just sometimes just happens, It's so funny.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. That's so classic. Should we take a quick break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
All right. And we're back. So continuing the conversation about big church versus small church, there's something we brought up before: resources. This one I find the most compelling argument for either, in my opinion. I don't know, Jesse might see it differently, but I guess straight off the bat, I like big churches because I feel like it's a more effective way to pull resources. simply because of the structure and the way we run church. Obviously, house churches, totally different story because you don't need anything other than probably food because it's at someone's house. You know what I mean? Like there's really not much required to run that.
Yeah.
But to run a small church that has a church service, that's a lot of resources and a big burden on a small group of people, in my opinion. So I feel like if you want that model, then you should be striving for a decent collection of people.
Okay, so
in my opinion,
I would have agreed with you a few years ago. I would have been like, yep, totally there with you. I think where I'm at now, you're going to have to convince me why that's a good idea, because I'm at the point where I feel like big church ends up like, okay, you said that you think that they're more of an effective use of resources. I see it in the sense of I almost feel like it's a bigger waste of resources to have a huge church. So I'm more than happy to be proven wrong, but why do you think they're more effective in managing resources?
Well, I just feel like you've got a okay. Well, and the complicated part of this is a building, right? So let's just assume, like for a fair comparison, you've got a small church who owns a building and a large church that own a building, right?
Yeah.
So a small church that owns a building probably has less of a flow of income, right, coming in. So then they probably have to clean the church themselves.
Shall we put a number?
To,
Shall we put a number on this? Like 50 versus, let's say, what, 1,000?
Yeah, let's say under 50 versus over 150.
Okay, all right.
Right? Just for a simple, yeah. Like, again, and this is like compare like two churches that want to have like a formal church service in a church building.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got one group who has to like do all the cleaning themselves, and generally they have to get up. It's the same people doing the same thing every single week. If they're not there, it's a huge struggle to get anything else to happen. It's also like you think about the like teenagers. That means there'll generally only be like one teenager or two teenagers, and they're trying to run like a whole formal Sabbath school program for them as well. So that costs more resources, and just there won't be as big a flow of income. And so it's more like it's human resource and it's financial resource as well. Like the burden, even to have to pay for insurance over that building too. But then you go to like over 150 and you've got more regular flow of income. Then you've got like multiple teams of people who can be involved. And, you know, so you've got like less of a risk of burnout. You've got more people that it's possible to disciple and bring up into leadership roles for like youth and kids programs. You've got more of like a core group who you can gather, and it's more worth it to get those sort of resources for them.
And we're assuming that like these churches have a 50 to 70% participation rate amongst their members, sort of thing.
Sure, that's probably generous, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, it is.
I mean, a smaller church, yeah, it has to be to
Yeah.
even function. You have to get a huge membership participation rate, but larger
Okay, well,
churches,
maybe that's-
they can afford a lower rate, which
Right.
you know you don't want. You want to be pushing for, but they have leeway for a lower rate.
So maybe that's
And
another
still be able
element. Maybe that's the other element, is that would you say then there is a correlation between church size and participation rate from members in terms of volunteer positions and things like that?
I think so. Like, I think you're more likely to, in smaller churches, you're more likely to get more people involved.
Yeah.
Which is good, but it comes at a cost, because it means you're sort of like filling slots, which isn't bad because it's getting people out of their comfort zone, which can be really good for their discipleship journey. But it can also mean that they don't even get a chance to act within their spiritual gifts, you know,
Right.
and like do something that they're actually gifted and wired to do and be unleashed to do just that, you know?
Yeah. So then would you say then that a larger church, somebody who attends a larger church, there would probably be more of an incentive for that person to just be a pew warmer, to not be really active in their spiritual gifting, than somebody who was attending a smaller church?
I think so. Again, I don't have research to back this up. This is just from what I've seen, visiting, looking around. Like, I don't know. I just feel like when you're at a smaller church, it is harder for you to just sit back
Yeah.
'Cause you actually sort of see the struggle as well. You know, you
Yes.
see like,
Yes.
oh man, they're doing the same thing. I kind of feel bad for them. You know, maybe I should, even though I don't feel ready or like I want to, I should probably step in and do something about this. You know, I don't know. That's
And I'll tell you guys, like, if you want to come to Palmerston North, come to Mosaic, you'll see it. You'll see when our sound system fails, or you'll see when the worship leader has a different song to the piano player, and they're trying to marry the two up together. And like that's just a reality in small churches.
Oh, totally. So that's why, like, I mean, ideally, obviously, there's like outliers and all that kind of stuff. But ideally, I think it can be a better use of resource to pull them all into one place.
Okay.
For a bigger church.
Interesting.
In my opinion.
Well, okay. So then, talk to me about how budgeting.
Well, hang on. You haven't shared your opinion.
Oh, well, okay. Well, So I guess probably my opinion would verge on the other end of the extreme, which is that I think that not every church should have a formal worship service the way that we have in the Western world. I think that
I would agree.
Okay.
Yep.
I also know that the vast majority of churches who are small, if I were to say that to them, they would probably just get offended and completely ignore my advice. And I think that we are kind of married to a lot of our models of church. And I think that saying what I'm about to say will sound really idealistic, but I actually think that a lot of churches would benefit from shutting down the weekend service, at least the holy hour, 11 till 12 p.m., whatever, and just do Bible study, do outreach, do the breaking of bread, the wine and the bread sort of thing, and just being a sort of, I guess, essentially a house church. Maybe what I'm saying is that I think that more small churches need to be house churches. Maybe.
Yeah. Because I think I would agree, because I think there's definitely a place for big churches and small churches, but for that traditional church structure, I think it just functions better at bigger numbers. You know, I think small churches are really awesome and really necessary for groups of, like, there's certain people who only ever connect to small churches, and that's great, and I think we should have small churches, but they need to structure them correctly for their size. You know, don't try and be something that you're not. Because even, like, the bigger you grow, you have to constantly restructure. Like, when you get into the thousands, you can't do the things that would work in my church, like at a 200. And I'm sure it's the same when you get to 10,000 and 20,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there's radical structure changes. And I think we actually need to be conscious and make those same sort of structural choices under 50 as well.
Yeah.
All that sort of thing. Not try and be that big formal church. Just be what you are and embrace it.
Yeah. So I guess my criticism of big church, I don't want to pick on churches outside of our faith tradition, but I think that possibly a lot of the cynicism that I've accrued towards big church has to do with the big churches, the huge churches, the Hillsongs and the Church of the Highlands and the Life churches, at least the ones that I've seen. And I think my view is probably very small because I'm not in the back end and I'm not seeing all the things that are happening, and I'm not seeing all the amazing ways that the money and the resources are actually being used. I'm just getting a small snippet. But when I see a lot of these huge churches and I see some of the stuff that they have, and as I said before, the sound system and the lighting on the stage, all of which is excellent, and I enjoy on an artistic and on a spiritual level. I enjoy it. I mean, I'm making it sound like I hate these churches. I don't. I really like them.
Yeah.
I'm glad they're there. I'm glad that they're leaders in terms of, like, I'm glad Hillsong is there because it's the world's leader in creativity and music in the church today, for better or for worse. That's what they are. You know, I'm glad for the ministry, and I'm glad for every single person that has made a decision for Jesus Christ as a result of these big churches. But I do wonder if the resources that are being used could be put to better use if they were not building enormous complexes and instead putting them to something else. I don't know if that's like a Judas sort of argument, like, if only this money was given to the poor and not wasted on expensive perfume. I don't know, but that's I guess where I'm at when it comes to big churches. Maybe I'm just cynical. I don't know.
Could be. I think it depends what you want to achieve, and I don't know, that's probably a vague answer, but I think creating that spectacle, obviously, this doesn't happen in the Bible, and people can be like, oh, that's not biblical. Biblical is house churches and that kind of thing. Sure, but there's a lot unsaid about what church should look like, and I don't think necessarily that your church has to look exactly like structurally what the churches in the Bible look like, because we live in a totally different society.
Yeah.
And we're less communal. So it's like house churches are kind of more difficult, and we could bring that back, obviously. But I think the Bible is vague enough in how to do it that I think it gives us enough license to be creative about it, as long as we're still fulfilling the core values of anyway, I don't think I need to explain that anymore.
Correct.
But I think that mega churches, as long there's a huge difference between unhealthy and healthy mega churches. There are some mega churches that I can't stand. I'm not going to list them because it's not fair, and I don't know them well enough, and there's misunderstanding. But there are some churches that I know really well. I know a lot about Hillsong because I've sort of been in and out, sort of when I know people connected to it. And there's a lot of cool things that they can do and discipleship opportunities that they have that could only come about through their structure. That makes sense.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Well, having full-time worship leaders. Their job, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or full-time graphic designers who just do church stuff. You just cannot create those sort of creative discipleship opportunities. And the fact that they can lead other people who aren't paid. I don't know, for me, that's amazing. And the sort of, they do these big, Christmas spectaculars, like Hillsong. You can't do that with a anything less than what they, what the sort of buildings that they have and the teams that they have. They can do these amazing Christmas spectaculars. They're also incredible evangelistic opportunities, and a lot of people come through their church from that. I don't know, I guess when you think about it, it's like, well, what's the alternative? Should they, rather than build one building that can seat 7,000, should they have built I don't know, I can't even do the math. Should they have built 7 buildings that only seat 1,000?
Right. Or 14 buildings that can only seat 500, or 32 that can only seat 250 or whatever.
Yeah, they've just grown, and that's the structure that they've chosen that works best for their growth. And I don't know about all of their campuses, but I know with Hillsong, their main campus at Hills, they use every part of that building all the time. They get incredible use out of that building. Yeah. And I think what they've done well is that they've structured that building to work with their ministry. So I feel like in that specific example, it's a very good use of money. But there are some churches who will build these elaborate, not even that size. Let's just say even some Adventist churches, and they build these big, beautiful buildings that cost, I don't know, even millions, into the millions. And all they do is a church service there once a week.
Yeah.
That to me is a bigger waste of money than what a lot of mega churches do.
Yeah.
Because mega churches, that they're using that building all week long for all of their staff and for meetings and all that kind of thing. Whereas often a lot of church buildings are just built, even cathedrals and that kind of thing, incredible amounts of money for very little use. Not targeting anybody, but I just feel like if you're going to spend a lot of money, it's got to be really drawn up and done well with your structure and how you want to do church and what you want to achieve with that building. If that makes sense?
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, no. I see your perspective. I don't know if I'm 100% there, but I definitely see your perspective, just simply because I don't know that I have a better solution to what you're saying. In terms of the multi-site model, I think the multi-site model is definitely I don't know. I feel like it's kind of dying off a little bit in the Western world. Although there are some people who very much are like it's not dying, but I've seen enough buzz about is the multi-site model not working anymore in the last few years to think, I wonder if this is something that we're transitioning away from. So
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't say that multi-site is gone, but yeah. Sorry, you were gonna say?
Yeah. Oh well, I was gonna say I'm actually less. I'm less. I don't know. I hate ragging out like different models of church. To be honest, I'm not against any of this, but I'm less for multi-sites where they just have like a live stream of the preacher.
Right.
I'm actually less inclined for that because I'd rather, if you're gonna do multi-site, like empower another pastor to preach there. Do you know what I mean? Like it's taking away the opportunity for someone else to serve if it's just a live stream.
Well, then that bleeds into the whole celebrity pastor sort of discussion, which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But it definitely impacts on this because you could probably say that a lot of mega churches and multi-site churches are successful precisely because of the image or the brand of their pastor.
Could be. I think it always comes down to more than that, though. I think they only get big because people see like legitimacy with that. Do you know what I mean?
I think that the brand of the pastor is a draw card, but everything that they do to retain is a way of growth.
Maybe. I don't know if I'm. I don't know if I'm
draw
sold
them
on
in.
that.
You draw them in with. I don't know, like you draw them in with the pastor, you draw them in with the message, you draw them in with whatever your draw card is, whatever your marketing strategy is, and then you do everything like making them feel at home, getting them connected to a group, making them feel like they're a part of this as a way of retaining them. So then you grow through that.
I don't know, because most new people who go to a church, I don't think unless they're coming from another church, they don't necessarily go for just the preacher, I think. I feel like you go because you're invited by a friend or because, you're a part of a group or something. Like, a lot of their stories, like, that they share, that I've heard shared around, like, people coming to those bigger churches, is often because they run, like, a Gamblers Anonymous or, they were doing, like, street care sort of stuff or, like...
Yeah.
I don't know. And
That's
they
just
come
one
through
funnel.
that.
That's one funnel. There are many funnels. There have to be many funnels,
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. I don't think I necessarily agree that like the big draw card is the celebrity preacher. I think there's lots of things that they do to bring people in. Maybe in some churches, but I think that's good at drawing other Christians, but not necessarily non-Christians. I think.
I think that if there's going to be two main draw cards, it's going to be the music and it's going to be the preaching. I think that's pretty basic, but
could be. I remember reading Growing Young, and they talked about how like young people, they don't necessarily come to your church for a good preacher, but they'll leave if there's a bad preacher, which I found funny. Yeah. So I would say like good relevant preaching is like a retainer rather than an attractor.
Possibly. That's a good
Maybe.
thought. I think that leads us pretty well into the final thought that I had around that, which is leadership and, again, I guess temperament styles. Like, what is the best sort of church for different temperament styles? For instance, I got myself into a space in Tauranga where I wanted to kind of become that sort of leader of a large church sort of mentality. And all the training and all the professional development and all the resources that I was consuming to help get me into that place, I thought that was going to help me become that person. But that's kind of all been useless since moving to Palmy because, well, I'm not that guy anymore. People don't really come to Mosaic because I'm preaching. They come to Mosaic because of a multitude of different reasons. And most of it has to come down to family, and they feel like Mosaic is a family sort of place. And they don't really, treat me like a celebrity. Not that I was ever treated like a celebrity, but like that whole leadership trajectory was kind of like I had to kind of abandon that because I was like, yeah, this is not who I want to be. And, that was just a reality. But do you think that there are certain personalities that fit different churches, and not in terms of contemporary or conservative, but like, what do you think leadership has to do with size of church.
Yeah. I would say there's definitely like some leaders who are more fitted to a smaller, more relational church. You know? Like, I feel like the bigger you go, the more sort of like the leader has to be like more like visionary and really good at, I don't know, managing people. And whereas like if you're smaller, it's more an opportunity to be like like a pastor, like really relational, knowing everybody.
Right.
And if you're wired that way, I think it's awesome. You know, like how awesome would it be if you had a full-time pastor of your like 50-something church, and like the pastor can come around to your house for dinner like a few times a year, and like you get to just talk everything with them. Like, I think that's really, I mean, that's maybe make a bit too much of a celebrity out of the pastor, but you know what I mean? Like, it's...
Yeah.
Like, I think that's really cool that like your church leader would just know everyone so well. But you'd have to be the right type of leader for that.
A man of the people, or a woman of the people, you know, sort of.
Yeah, but once you get over 100, a pastor really can't connect well with everybody. You have to have multiple leaders doing... So I don't know. I think that's why like big churches work well when they're very good at empowering leaders. Like, if that makes sense. Like small churches empower leaders as well, but I think in big churches you have to be very good at it.
How do you think leadership structure has to, like you've already touched on it, how do you think leadership structure has to change from small to big church?
I have no idea. I'm still working that out and trying to figure out what the, you know what I mean? In my size, like, oh, like, is this the best structure for us? I don't know. Because like I've definitely seen that once, because when I was in Melbourne at my church there, that was the contemporary smaller one. It was really easy to just get to know everybody and hear where everybody's at. Like, oh, you're not liking this? Why aren't you liking this? Oh, actually, you know what? There's a few other people I've talked to who aren't liking this. Let's make a shift. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, once you get over 100, you really don't know. Like, you try, but you're only ever hearing the loud voices.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's...
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just like, do we need more staff, or do you just need a different volunteer and leadership structure in that?
Well,
my ideal... Oh, sorry.
No. All I was going to say was there was one adage that I heard, which is that the larger your church gets, the smaller the leadership structure has to get. In terms of, like, where I'm at with Mosaic is very similar. We have a leadership team, but we also have a bunch of ministry leaders, and they let us know when they don't like things. They're very good at communicating, you know, how they're feeling and where they're at. But when I was in Tauranga, our leadership. We had a leadership board, a church board, and that was, you know, smaller than our combined leadership team and ministry teams here in Mosaic. And it was, there were obviously there are loud voices, and there are always loud voices when it comes to any leadership team or church board or whatever. But we found that actually it was more effective for us to be able to do vision and mission with a smaller team of people. So we actually ended up appointing a vision casting team that was small, that included the pastoral team, the head elder, and one or two other really key leaders. And we worked on vision exclusively, and we communicated that to the church board. And it was really funny when we communicated that to the church board and then to the church, like the business meeting. We found that a lot of people who we thought might oppose it were just like, okay, because they kind of either they didn't care, or they were like, oh, that sounds good, we trust you, that's fine, you know. But when it comes to the minutia, a lot of the time people would get very worked up about very small things. But when it comes to some of the big vision casting stuff, if you have a small team of people that can actually take care of that, a lot of the time people go, oh, that's fine.
Wow, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's probably true. Like, we had a small board who was just doing, like, we don't have a representative board at Hamilton. We have, like, just a vision board, basically. Sort of similar.
You have a vision board.
Yeah. Oh, true. Our vision. No. Anyway, but yeah, it was really effective compared to, like, trying to do it with, like, a representative board or something, because that's heaps of people. But, like, my ideal structure would be that, like, for pastoral care, for example, I feel like once you get over 100, I feel like the majority of your pastoral care should come from a small group.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Because then, like, again, it's so much easier to care for 10 people. And like if you have like, and the pastor maybe can focus on more broad picture, big vision stuff, and managing, making sure all the ministries are functioning right. And if you got your little small group and like helping get people into small groups, then once you're in a small group, they're the ones who do it. Like if you've got struggles, you just talk to your small group about it. They pray for you, all that kind of thing. That for me is way more biblical and exciting.
Yeah.
And then the weekend service is just a celebration, like all the small groups coming together to celebrate together. And, you know, that's ideal for me anyway. That's what I think is like a really good structure that's very scalable.
Yes.
Like you can have as many small groups as you want, and then you just bring them all together.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you want a big gathering, bring all the small groups together. If you want a small gathering, just bring 5 of them together. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a pastor listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know if that's like super biblical, I would just say like this is the Jethro model. You know, like when Moses in the Old Testament was trying to adjudicate all the different cases and grievances that the Israelites had. You know, his father-in-law Jethro just comes along and says, dude, you're absolutely killing yourself trying to be God to everybody. You got to appoint people. You got to appoint people over, 1,000, 10,000, 100. Appoint these people. Let them do the work for you. Figure out the really hard stuff, but trust that these guys are going to actually do a good job. And that's what he did. So, no, definitely biblical.
Yeah. And like, I mean, even if you're a pastor of like, say 2-3 smaller churches, the biggest thing there that everybody told me when I started pastoring a small rural church, like doing two churches, was like, you got to trust your elders and trust that they do they kind of do a lot of pastoral care. You do some of it, but your elders, they're the ones that you got to trust. And I was like, man, it was really hard to do that at first, but once you start, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And just empowering the elders. And obviously there's still pastoral care that you, the pastor, do.
Yeah.
But I don't know, you're sort of trusting the elders and even the deacons to really... Yeah, and I think that's just exciting. And I think that's probably the big thing for us that we've talked about is like... I don't think it matters too much if your church is big or small as long as it aligns with your mission, that what you want to achieve as a church, and it's a good use of resources and people are still getting discipled effectively is the big thing. Like, I'm all for all different models of churches. Like, I love healthy big churches. I love healthy small churches, medium churches, anything. I don't like seeing unhealthy big churches or unhealthy small churches.
Yeah.
And so like and even when my comments before about multi-site, whatever, like as long as it's working and it's effective in discipling, then fine. Even if it's not my preference, that's fine. I think is the big thing.
So at the end of the day, the question is big church better than small church? Is small church better than big church? The answer, the definitive answer that we have concluded with, that is going to be for all generations upon generation unto generation is yes and no, with a couple of caveats. So
yes, but actually no.
So true to Burn the Haystack fashion, we ask a question and then we fail to give a definitive answer because I think, as you said, there is no definitive answer. I think at the end of the day, you can have healthy churches that are big or small, unhealthy churches that are the same. So maybe instead of focusing on if a church is big or not, let's just focus on getting healthier. And if our churches grow, maybe that's a great thing. Maybe it's not a great thing, but either way, I think God blesses us when we plant healthy things.
The real journey was the friends we made along the way. Anyway, sorry.
I want my money back.
No, but hey, let us know your thoughts. Maybe we're way off the mark and we need to readdress this, or we missed some things. I feel like we could have done like 2 or 3 episodes on this. There was a lot to talk about, and we went way over time. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do we need to continue this discussion? I had a good time talking about it and fleshed out, and I definitely learned a couple of things just in this chat. So yeah, it was good. I enjoyed myself.
Sweet. If the people want to learn more about Burn the Haystack, Josh, where do they go?
burnthehaystack.org. It looks good. It's got a fresh coat of paint on it, so make sure you go and check it out.
It is beautiful. And if you haven't already, please subscribe on the podcatching app of your choice. And if you want to help us out, just be a buddy. Help us be a buddy. No, I'm going to stop. Leave us a review. It'll be great. Leave us a review, please. Please. I'm begging you. All right.
And we should stop talking. That is Josh and Jesse out.
I bet they can't even tell that we haven't done this for 2 months. I bet they can't even tell.